Atlantic Ocean, killer whales declared war on boats. Since May 20, orcas off the coast of Spain and Portugal have rammed, disabled, and sunk sailing boats. Not once, not by accident, nearly 700 times. And after 5 years of research, nobody can fully explain why. This is everything we actually know. It started in the Strait of Gibraltar, one of the busiest, most heavily trafficked stretches of water on Earth, separating Europe from Africa. Sailors passing through began reporting something nobody expected. Their boats suddenly shaking from underneath, loud scraping sounds along the hull, and then, in the worst cases, their rudders torn completely off. Some describe the experience as their entire vessel being shaken like a toy, a 2-ton sailboat reduced, in the words of one passenger, to something closer to a nutshell in the jaws of something far more powerful than anyone on board. A small number of boats have sunk outright. Hundreds more have needed emergency repairs, some so severe that crews had to be rescued at sea before their vessel went under. What makes this especially strange is how localized and specific the behavior is. This isn't orcas attacking boats at random, anywhere in the world. It's a defined, trackable phenomenon, concentrated almost entirely in one particular stretch of ocean, carried out by a small, identifiable group of animals, repeating a strikingly consistent pattern, encounter after encounter for half a decade now. The animals responsible are a genetically distinct, critically endangered population of orcas known as Iberian killer whales, a subpopulation of roughly 35 individuals that live specifically around the waters of Spain, Portugal, and the Strait of Gibraltar, distinct from orca populations anywhere else on Earth. Researchers tracking the behavior have identified around 15 individual whales directly involved in these interactions, and most of them are juveniles. Because the population is so small, researchers have been able to do something almost never possible with wild orcas anywhere else in the world: individually identify, name, and follow nearly every whale involved in these incidents over time. Each animal linked to the boat interactions has been given a name, generally some variation on Gladys, allowing scientists to track which specific individuals are repeat participants, which ones seem to have picked up the behavior more recently, and which younger whales appear to be learning it in real time by watching older members of the pod. For years, the leading explanation circulating publicly involved a single female orca researcher named White Gladys. The story, which spread rapidly online, claimed Gladys had suffered a traumatic collision with a boat or become trapped in fishing gear, and that the resulting injury triggered what looked like a defensive, even vengeful reaction, an orca striking back at the very thing that had hurt her, with the behavior then spreading to other whales around her. It's a compelling story, and it's the version most people have heard. News outlets around the world ran with it, often framing the phenomenon as orcas exacting a kind of poetic revenge against wealthy yacht owners, a narrative that proved almost irresistible online, precisely because it gave a chaotic, unexplained behavior a clean emotional motive. But more recent analysis has complicated it significantly. Marine biologists who examined the scarring, originally attributed to a boat collision, now believe those marks are more consistent with something far more mundane: tooth raking, a normal, almost affectionate form of contact that happens between orcas within the same pod, closer to social grooming than an injury from a violent encounter. In other words, the injury that supposedly started the entire phenomenon may not have come from a boat at all. Researchers who study orca social behavior point out that tooth-raking marks like these show up constantly in healthy, ordinary orca populations around the world, and are not, on their own, evidence of any traumatic event whatsoever. That doesn't mean the behavior isn't real. It very clearly is. It just means the simplest, most emotionally satisfying explanation, revenge, may not be the correct one, and researchers studying the Iberian orcas have spent years working through several competing theories instead, none of which come with the same tidy narrative arc, but all of which are taken far more seriously within the actual scientific literature. The first is play. Orcas are highly intelligent, highly social animals known for elaborate, sometimes bizarre play behavior, including things like carrying dead fish around on their heads, for reasons scientists still don't fully understand. Some researchers believe the rudder ramming behavior may simply be a game, young orcas discovering that a boat's rudder moves, reacts, and provides an interesting object to manipulate, not unlike how a group of kids might discover a new toy and pass the idea around to their friends. Supporters of this theory, point to footage showing orcas apparently swimming with a broken rudder held in their mouths, seemingly displaying it, behavior that looks far closer to a dog proudly carrying a stick than anything resembling a coordinated attack. The second theory is closely related, that this is a cultural fad. In the same sense orca researchers use that word elsewhere. Orca behavior is famously passed down through observation and imitation rather than pure instinct. If one orca in the Iberian population discovered that interacting with rudders was interesting or rewarding, it's entirely plausible other members of the pod, especially younger, more impressionable individuals, picked it up simply because it became something worth doing. The same way a fad might spread and eventually fade among a group of humans, without any single unifying motive behind it. Researchers studying the timeline of individual whales joining the behavior have noted exactly the kind of spread you'd expect from social learning. It started with a small number of individuals and gradually expanded outward through the pod's social network over several years, rather than appearing simultaneously across the entire population. A third theory points towards something more uncomfortable: stress. The Strait of Gibraltar isn't just one of the busiest shipping lanes in the world, it's also one of the loudest. Orcas rely heavily on echolocation and sound to navigate, hunt, and communicate. And researchers studying whale strandings elsewhere in the world have linked heavy underwater noise pollution to serious behavioral disruption in marine mammals. Add to that the fact that as apex predators, orcas accumulate high concentrations of industrial pollutants in their bodies over their lifetimes, chemicals known elsewhere to cause neurological effects. And you have a population of animals potentially dealing with a combination of chronic noise stress and chemical exposure that no orca population has had to face in quite this concentrated form before. Under this theory, the rudder targeting behavior isn't play or revenge at all, but something closer to a symptom, an outward sign of a population under sustained biological and environmental pressure, expressing itself in a way that happens to be highly visible to humans, simply because it involves our boats. A fourth theory, and one taken seriously by at least some researchers, is that this could be a form of hunting practice. Young orcas using rudders as a stand-in for prey, testing and refining predatory behavior on an object that moves, resists, and eventually breaks. The same way play fighting in many predator species doubles as skill building for real hunts later in life. This theory gains some support from the sheer precision of the behavior. The whales consistently target the rudder specifically, the single moving, resistant part of an otherwise mostly static object, which is exactly the kind of feature a young predator refining its technique might be drawn to practice against. Some researchers have gone further, suggesting the rudder may simply resemble, in shape and resistance, the kind of prey these orcas would naturally target: large fish or squid with a firm but yielding structure that rewards a precise, repeated bite. None of these theories fully rules out the others, and most researchers studying the phenomenon believe the real explanation is likely some combination of factors rather than one single clean cause. What's clear is what's actually happening on the water. The pattern of these encounters is remarkably consistent. The orcas approach from below, target the rudder specifically rather than the hull, and lose interest almost immediately once the boat stops moving or the rudder is disabled. Behavior distinct enough that researchers have been able to map exact hotspots and issue seasonal advisories, warning sailors that interactions cluster heavily between May and August, concentrated almost entirely around the Strait of Gibraltar. The consistency of that pattern is itself one of the most studied aspects of the entire phenomenon. Researchers analyzing hundreds of recorded interactions have found that spade-shaped rudders, a common modern sailboat design, are damaged far more often than other rudder types, and that the vast majority of encounters end the same way. Once forward momentum stops, the whales typically disengage within minutes, sometimes circling briefly before losing interest entirely and moving on. That level of predictability is hard to reconcile with pure random aggression, and easier to explain if the behavior is functioning. For the orcas, more like an activity with a clear beginning and end than an open-ended attack. That predictability has led to real, practical changes for sailors in the region. Maritime safety experts now advise crews who encounter the whales to stop the boat entirely, drop their sails, and avoid sudden movements of the rudder, since continued motion appears to prolong and intensify the interaction. One website built specifically to track sightings has become essential reading for captains planning a route through the strait, with its creator describing the goal simply: give sailors enough information to choose a different day or a different path, rather than sailing directly into an active encounter. During peak months, the site has logged encounters happening nearly every single day, sometimes multiple times in the same day, giving researchers and sailors alike an almost real-time picture of where the whales are active at any given moment. There's also something worth sitting with here, beyond the mystery itself. The Iberian orca population isn't just unusual, it's critically endangered, with a total population small enough that researchers can individually identify and name nearly every whale involved. Every theory on this list, whether it's play, stress, cultural fad, or hunting practice, points back to the same underlying reality. This is a small, unique population of highly intelligent animals responding, in some way, to an ocean increasingly crowded with the exact kind of noise, traffic, and chemical exposure that didn't exist for their ancestors. It's worth remembering, too, that despite years of viral headlines about orca attacks, there has never been a documented case of an Iberian orca injuring a human during one of these encounters. The damage consistently has been to boats, specifically rudders, not to the people aboard them. Whatever is actually driving this behavior, it appears to be directed at a very specific target, not at people themselves, which itself is another piece of evidence against the simplest, most sensational explanations that tend to dominate headlines and social media. Sailors who have gone through an encounter and are often described genuine fear in the moment, understandably, given the size and power of the animals involved. But the actual outcome, in the vast majority of documented cases, has been a damaged rudder and a frightening story to tell, not an injury. Whatever the full answer turns out to be, one thing about this story has remained true for 5 straight years now. The orcas started it, and so far, nothing anyone has tried has convinced them to stop. Not warnings, not avoidance, not 5 years of scientists watching closely and still not quite agreeing on why.